Slowly, James blinked awake from his slumber in the dead of night, although he saw nothing but darkness whether they were open or closed. Unaware of what had woken him up, he shifted slightly, trying his best to will his consciousness back into the land of the dreams before he would be too aware to do so. Closing his eyes tightly, he emptied his mind, feeling the active pull to drift back off. However, something wouldn't allow him to. In his dazed state, he couldn't really put a name to what it was. All he knew was that something felt wrong. Shifting even more with his hazy consciousness stuck somewhere in between awareness and dreams, his arm momentarily stretched out across the bed. The empty bed. For a second longer, he didn't quite have the awareness to fully process why exactly a part of his brain was raising alarm bells at that, as his arm autonomously patted along the empty sheets that surrounded him, feeling nothing but the flat mattress beside him. Then, finally, his aware mind jolted into action, causing him to instantly sit up straight from his lying position, and now both of his arms were searching the sheets around him, but to no avail. They were abandoned. "Shida?" he asked with a croaky voice, and his eyes glanced around, although they found nothing but darkness. No gleam of light from underneath the door indicating that she had just gotten up to use the bathroom, and no answer to his question. "Lights on," he ordered the room, causing bright artificial light from above to illuminate the honey-yellow hive room and sting into his eyes, blinding him momentarily while he did his best to glance around through heavily squinting eyes. There was no sign of Shida, not a hint of anything living except for him in sight. Even her clothes that had littered the floor next to his when they had turned in for the night had disappeared, together with her phone that had been charging on the nightstand. Seeing that, James immediately threw himself across the last mattress to reach for his own phone, like a goalkeeper trying to prevent a game-losing score. If something had happened, he would have to make contact as quickly as he could. However, as he activated the device's screen to quickly search for a contact, he came face to face with a single missed message, along with the realization that someone had muted his notification sounds while he had been out. "I can't just leave it alone." The message sent by Shida's number read, "I'm going to face it, and then get over it once and for all. I'll be back in the morning." For just a moment, James stared at the message. Then, his hand closed so tightly around the phone that it nearly threatened to break it for a second, as he gritted his teeth and changed the contact he was calling. "Get moving, everyone," he said, along the open line he and his team had established. Shida's ears twitched and shifted as they turned in each direction to give her a better picture of her surroundings, while she approached her destination with quick steps. The station's public transportation had taken her far. However, the local detention center did not have its own stop, meaning it would be a 4-minute walk before she could finally leave this all behind her. Just a few minutes walking before she could face him alone. She could feel the tension inside her building up, sending mild shivers through her at every sound around her that reached her scanning ears. She knew the risks she was taking, knew that out on her own she was a lot more vulnerable than she was surrounded by capable allies. She had to be careful. Still, she wasn't sure if the building anxiety inside her was truly caused by worries about possibly being attacked, or if the nerves she felt were instead brought on by the prospect of what she was about to do. She felt her claws extend as she nervously flexed her fingers while she took step after step across the suspended walkway that would lead her to where he was held. There were people around, but none that worried her too much. Simple civilians on their way to who knew where, most of them likely entirely unaware about the kind of people and events their little station here was currently being the site of. As she walked, the little lights this place loved to play with danced around her legs in sparkling ripples, mimicking the sight of her walking across water instead of solid ground. Usually she possibly would have found little amenities like this endearing. Now, they were nothing but incredibly off-putting, as the playfulness of this decorative technology clashed so drastically with the urgency and anxiety she felt inside of her. Still, she imagined walking along a way like this on a peaceful day out, enjoying the sights of the station and quietness around her, while around every corner, A new set of playful lights would await to paint a different picture around their walking feet. Surely James or one of the other humans would have a grand time, playing around and seeing what exactly they could get the lights to do, if they only move right. Curry would analyze and explain the complicated sensors that were involved in making sure even such an inane technology was working as flawlessly as it did, in tracking and predicting the motions of people walking across it. Moore would comment on how nice it was that this place was decorated with such animated pleasantries for the people living or visiting here, and Conglorch would growl at her words, but still keep one of his eyes busy, observing the display of lights. But now, she just hurried across it, and the only attention she could really pay to the lights was whenever one of their movements caught the corner of her vision, in a way that made her think someone unwanted may have been approaching her. An inane distraction that made far more trouble than it was worth to her. Finally, she approached the ramp that would take her off this sparkly walkway, and down to the ground below, where a large, blocky building was already waiting for her. Luckily, it seemed that even the designers of this station had at least some ability to discern between appropriate and inappropriate areas of such happy-go-lucky decor, meaning that the detention center was kept empty of the animated displays, instead showing nothing but empty, metal walls and ground around it. Momentarily, Shida's eyes and ears stuck to a group of people that were lodging on one of the platforms she had to pass on her way down to more solid ground. However, the Lakshasat, Uronik, and Koristilch that had congregated there were simply babbling about some sort of game that their team of preference had apparently lost the previous day, and about how apparently the sudden interruption caused by a certain breaking newsfeed had made them miss the game-losing score in the end.
Honestly, you think they'd understand that if I wanted to see the news, I would have tuned into a news channel?
The large Uronik complained, and bounced on his flat feet disapprovingly, while shaking his fluffy head.
Unless a war is actively breaking out and I have to hurry to a shelter, they do well to give the people what they came to their channel for.
Right, the large Kodradilsh concurred, and fell onto all fours to more easily talk to his smaller friends, which caused his clubbed tail to swing high into the air.
We're electing people to deal with this sort of stuff, so that we don't have to constantly worry about every idiot who doesn't know how to install a data compartment. We didn't develop all these defenses for nothing, after all. If we've dealt with AI in the past, they can deal with it now that they have the proper resources, no problem.
Well, maybe I should be thankful. At least I didn't have to see myself lose 20,000 UC live and in high definition this way. The Lakshasat sighed with hanging ears. That was all my spending money for this month.
You're a bigger danger to yourself than an AI could ever be,
the Uronik scolded him, following that, which caused him and the Koristilch to break out into laughter, while the Lakshasat further left his head hanging with another sigh. Shida smacked her lips as she briefly bared her teeth in disapproval while she passed the group of unaware idiots. The very history and fate of the entire galaxy was being shaped before their very eyes, and they cared about sports and low-stakes bets and pocket money? And they had the gall to complain that someone was trying to make them care about something that influenced the lives of millions of people every day? The lives of people that couldn't afford not to care, no matter how much they may have wanted to worry about inanities instead. Shida had to force herself to keep walking, otherwise she may have done something she would regret later. She had something she needed to do here, and she could not waste her precious time on someone like them. Not now, at least. If they were still there when she got back, they had better be prepared for the dressing down of their lifetime. As she reached the station ground again, and tilted her head back up to look at the massive block of a structure before her, her pocket suddenly began to vibrate. Pulling out her phone, she was confronted with the fact that her absence had been noted. It had only been a matter of time, of course, but her heart still skipped a beat and filled her body with tingles, as the certainty that it had happened sank in. Shida, what are you doing? Where are you? James's voice came over the line almost as soon as she had picked up. Shida exhaled slowly, trying to still her nerves. I'm at the detention center, she answered honestly, doing her best to keep her voice calm and firm. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to get all of this out of my system and put a final end to it, once and for all. I'm sorry I snuck out, but I have to do this. Inside her, the certainty that this was something she absolutely must do wrestled with the guilt she felt from the way she needed to do it. But why sneak out? James asked, his voice carrying every emotion connected to worry and stress at once, as he clearly forced it not to break through willpower alone. Why not just talk to me? We could have... Because you worry about me, Shida interrupted him. You honestly do, and I love you for that, really. But I know you wouldn't have let me go alone. And I don't want anyone to see what is going to happen here. Maybe I will tell you all about it at some point. But I don't want any of you to see. I need to get it all out, okay? She could hear James's breathing as he seemingly tried to comprehend what she was telling him, while also holding back his most immediate response. She could tell that there were a lot of things he wanted to say, none of which were productive, and to his credit, he held them all back. You're at the detention center now, he ultimately asked with a serious tone. Yes, Shida replied. I'm about to go inside. She could hear James exhale. Don't go anywhere else, all right? We're on our way. Wait for us right there, he said, and the worry that he must have felt underneath his firmness managed to creep into his voice, causing guilty stings to pierce Shida's chest. Okay? I'll be here, Shida confirmed for him. He was giving her as much time as they would need to get here. There would have to be enough. And she wasn't going to run away from them after. This was something that she had decided to do, knowing fully well of consequences it might have. And if she had learned one thing from James, then it was to stand to the decisions she had made, even if they may have been bad ones. James? She asked over the line, hoping he was still listening and wouldn't immediately hang up. Yes, he replied, although it sounded like he was already in a hurry to leave, so he could get on his way to her as quickly as possible. I really am sorry about this, she said in full earnest, although her guilt did not override her firm need to see this through. I love you. James was quiet for just a moment. I love you too, he then answered. Please be safe, treasure. Then, they ended their call. Feeling her knees turn weak for just a moment, Shida stopped for a second, as she allowed her phone to sink down, her fingers grabbing tightly onto it, so she wouldn't accidentally drop it, before she stored it back into her pocket. She exhaled, and her ears twitched to scan her surroundings once again. The area was barren and empty. Right now, it was only her in the detention center. Time to cut myself loose, she said to herself, as her claws willingly unfurled for a second before tugging back in. It was the best she could do to amp herself up here. Then she took her first stomping step in the direction of the entrance. A massive pair of reinforced doors awaited her, refusing entrance to anyone who was not welcomed in first. Next to them, dispersed evenly across a variety of average body heights, were small terminals meant for communication with the inside. Not allowing herself the necessary time for her brain to question the decision, she quickly reached up and pressed the button to notify that someone was requesting entrance. As she did so, she could feel a single bead of sweat start to form on her forehead, while her heart rate picked up by at least a dozen BPM. Identify yourself, a voice requested from the terminal, after a tense moment of silent waiting. Shida breathed in and out quickly. Lieutenant Commander Shida of the UHSDF. She introduced herself briefly. What is your business here, Lieutenant Commander? The voice from the inside addressed her, sounding very slightly surprised at who they were faced with here. Or maybe not the who of the person, but instead the what of the rank, was what gave them pause. I would like to visit a detainee, she announced on the microphone before her, suppressing every bit of nervousness she felt for a firm expression. Captain Ferrimore Uton. The line was quiet for a moment, but she had done her research. She hadn't just randomly snuck out during any point of the night. These were visiting hours. Just try to tell me I'm wrong, she grimly thought to herself, as she stared at the camera that was broadcasting her face to whatever guard sat on the other side of the line. Suddenly, a panel on the terminal pulled back, revealing a sticky, pink bioscanner underneath. "Please confirm your identity," the voice said, and Shida did as she was asked as he lowered her hand onto the scanner for a second. It didn't even take that long, usually. "Confirmed," the voice announced from the speaker. "Welcome, Lieutenant Commander. Please step inside and follow the personnel's directions." With that, the doors next to the terminal unlocked with a hiss and a soft grinding sound, pulling out of the way and allowing her inside. Right before the first set of doors was a short airlock-like hallway that led straight to another set of just as heavy doors. Shida felt another wave of nerves rise up within her. If something was going to happen to her now, this was it. No chance to get out of there without help. Still, she had resolved herself to whatever fate this would bring her, and so she forced her slightly numb legs to move as she quickly walked into the lock. Immediately after she was fully inside, the doors behind her closed. "Please be patient for a moment while you are scanned for possible contraband," the room itself seemed to announce to her, as she could hear the whirring and clicking of machinery working coming from all around her. There was no visible indicator of the scan being performed, but it sure was loud, as the moving parts of the scanners moved along behind the outer plating of the walls. Once the sound powered down again, a small hatch opened in the wall to her left, forming one of the few noticeable features of this hallway that wasn't just a blank wall. "Please deposit your firearm and knife into the hatch for safe custody during your stay," the same voice announced a moment later. Figures this would be necessary, and without allowing herself to worry too much about it, Shida followed the instructions once again. Carefully, she deposited the weapon she had kept at her side on her way here into the empty space behind the hatch, before watching it close, locking her best means of defending herself away behind blast-proof steel. Moments later, a small slit right next to the hatch suddenly spit out a small polymer card with a quiet ding. "Please take and safely store your docket for later retrieval of your property," the voice announced. "Do not lose it." Shida nodded to herself and pulled the card out of the slit, before shoving it into the breast pocket of her uniform jacket. This damned procedure was costing a lot of time, and she could feel it becoming harder to keep doubts from creeping in. However, finally, the second set of doors on the other side of the lock opened for her to step inside of the building proper. Right behind it, she could already hear a small person waiting for her. The Lakshasette stepped semi-nervously in place as she approached. Looking around, she found herself not in the next hallway like she had expected, but in what appeared to be a miniature train station of sorts, with a small platform forming the ground under her feet, while the rest of the room was taken up by rails carrying small wagons. Inside of Shida, the feeling came up that she may have just underestimated the actual sheer size of this building from the outside. "Welcome, Lieutenant Commander," the Lakshasette greeted her, as she fully stepped onto the platform in front of the rails. "A wagon is on the way to transport you to your destination. Please have a moment of patience." Shida nodded quietly, not interested in engaging the Vulpin in conversation. So far, this entire process was lengthy, but didn't smell of anything fishy. At least she could pick up no hints that anyone or anything here had ill intentions towards her. Silently, she crossed her arms and tapped her foot while waiting for her transport, doing her best to keep her mind focused exactly on the here and now, so it wouldn't wander to anything else. Meanwhile, the Vulpine worker of the facility nervously stepped on the spot with their large ears twitching and tail mildly swaying, clearly unsure if they should break the silence or not. Ultimately, it seemed that Shida's impatient aura dissuaded them from trying to distract her from the wait, and finally the wagon emerged from the tunnel to their side, hovering across the rails towards the platform, where it stopped and opened its entire side so Shida could step on. "It will automatically take me to where I need to go?" Shida asked, as she put one foot inside but waited to fully board. "Yes, ma'am," the Lakshasette nodded, clearly keeping things brief for her mood. "Perfect," Shida replied, and fully stepped inside of the vehicle, with the door quickly closing behind her. The message, "Please strap in," flashed on a big red indicator right at the front of the thing, foiling her plans of remaining standing in the middle of it, with her arms crossed until she reached wherever she was being transported. Instead, she sat down on one of the large green seats inside of the cabin and dutifully fastened one of the provided straps around her body to secure herself in place. As soon as the system detected her security, the wagon started up, and Shida was immediately informed that not allowing passengers to stand had been a good idea on the designer's part, as she felt herself be pressed into the seat with not insignificant force through the acceleration. That would have surely been enough to knock her off her feet, had she not been entirely ready for it. She wondered if the system detected her Deathworlder status in some way, as she wasn't sure if this kind of acceleration wouldn't have been a bit much for some of the more fragile species that existed in the galaxy to handle. But whatever may have been the case, this was good for her, because it meant that things would proceed faster. She sat there, feeling herself being mildly thrown left to right, as the wagon sped along the rails through the building, taking a sharp turn or a long sweeping curve upwards every now and then. But ultimately, the journey didn't take all too long, and soon she felt herself be thrown against the straps keeping her in place, as the wagon decelerated again, soon coming to a halt, and allowing her to unstrap and get in. Her already wild hair was a bit tousled from the mildly wild ride. However, despite her annoyance at that, she still appreciated the speedy transport deep down. The side of the wagon unlocked for her again, and allowed her to step out onto yet another platform next to the rails, on top of which another Lakshasette with slightly grey fur was already waiting for her. "Right this way, ma'am," the Vulpine announced almost immediately, and turned on the spot to lead her towards a new set of reinforced doors that looked a lot like the ones that had led her inside of the building. Not a lot of artistry appeared to be involved in the making of this place. The Lakshasette moved quickly and efficiently, as she began to follow them through the doors and into a hallway that housed long rows of even more doors, which Shida assumed would lead into the cells of some of the detainees, probably sorted in the building by their specific bodily sizes, if she had to guess. Maybe they had already been tipped off to her impatience by their colleague. Or maybe they just preferred to do things this way. It didn't really matter. They would get her to her destination, which was good. Instead of leading her through the entire hallway, however, the Lakshasette pointed her in the direction of an open area that was closest to the platform they had come from. The room was cube-shaped, with its corners rounded on one side. The other side was entirely taken up by a massive wall made of tempered glass. Judging by its consolidation in the wall, it appeared to be thicker than Shida's forearm was long. On both sides of the glass wall, small cabins made of much thinner glass were lined up one next to another along its entire length. If Shida had to guess, this allowed for the sound of conversations to be isolated between the different cabins, while it still allowed surveillance for insight into anything they did, so nothing could be secretly smuggled past them. "Will a conversation be enough for your visit?" her accompanying Vulpine asked her, as they pointed towards one of the cabins, indicating that any visit that was supposed to include physical contact to one of the detainees would call for more specific arrangements to be made first. "It will entirely," Shida replied with a nod, and began to walk towards the cabin pointed out for her. "Will he be here soon?" she then asked, with a look over her shoulder. "He has agreed to see you." The Lakshasette nodded. "He better," Shida said in a low growl, and opened the glass cabin in front of her, calming herself down with a deep breath before she stepped inside. This was it. Crossing her arms, she waited. She even closed her eyes as she felt the seconds tick by. She had risked a lot to come here. Who knew what consequences it would have down the line? But she had to do this. She felt it in her bones. And now, it was finally time. Finally time to put this to rest. He'd better not keep her waiting. Although she seemed calm on the outside, her heart was beating like in a mad sprint, spurred on by a mixture of anticipation, anger, and anxiety. Although the longer she waited, the more anger started to take hold. That man had already cost her years of her life. Now she didn't appreciate him taking a single extra second. Still, Her eyes remained closed for a moment longer, even as she started to perceive another presence in front of her. Something was obviously in place to allow them to hear each other, despite the incredibly thick glass in between, and she could hear the sounds of his flat feet flapping onto cold, hard metal as he arrived inside of the cabin on the other side.
"Shida,"
his voice said, mildly distorted by whatever transported the sound from one side of the glass to the other. Still, he sounded mournfully happy to see her. Shida's eyes snapped open, her yellow gaze instantly burrowing into the large primate's dark eyes as she stared him down. "Don't Shida me," she said with a sharp hiss, as her eyes narrowed at the tone he was taking with her. He should be either pissed or apathetic that she came here to see him, not damn happy. I'm here for myself, not for you. The large nostrils in Uton's dark face flared as he let out a slow breath through his nose.
"Of course you are,"
he replied, and lowered himself to sit down in his own glass cabin, separated from her through the impenetrable barrier between them.
"And I've agreed to see you for your sake as well. I would never want you to see me in such a position, but clearly there is something you need. So tell me, what can this old man help you with, Shida?"
Shida bared her teeth and clenched her fists as she pulled herself together to the best of her ability. "You will address me by my proper rank, Captain," she commanded him fiercely, not wishing her name to come out of that mouth with that piercingly familiar tone. Each time it did, it felt like a kick to the stomach. Uton smirked, his thin lips tightly stretching over his long teeth underneath.
"Lieutenant Commander,"
Uton addressed her, following her command with a still mournful but very clearly proud undertone.
"I haven't gotten the opportunity to congratulate you yet. That rank is quite an achievement. Many will not see it through their entire time of service."
"Don't," Shida growled warningly, not wishing to hear another word about it out of the man. However, Uton wasn't going to be intimidated by her easily.
"I can't help my pride," he said, unperturbed by her warning. "I've raised you from the greenest of cadets all the way to such a capable woman. I can't help but revel in your achievements."
Shida had to suppress her impulse to bang her fist against the glass, knowing that it would likely get her thrown out if she misbehaved like that. Instead, her tail began to sway swiftly, drawing aggressive S-shapes into the air, as it couldn't hold still for even a second. "If that was true, you wouldn't have held me back for years of my life," Shida growled back at him, unable to hold back the change of topic caused by the man's words. It wasn't what she had come here for, but she wouldn't allow him to lie to her face like that. Not anymore. "Almost a uniform year of service, and I had to claw every advancement from your hands as if it was the most precious of stones. All these years, I thought you were being held back from advancing me by others watching your hand. Now I see you've been free to do so as you please this entire time. Go on. Tell me how proud you were while you watched everyone under your command soar past me in the ranks, while you left me to rot at the bottom of the food chain. How proud were you, year after year, to see me standing in the same spot while everyone else moved up in the line? How proud were you to give Rujak that promotion right after I had left your command?"
Uton hung his head. "You were never meant for mere officer work," he replied as he avoided eye contact with her. "I was trying to prepare you for so much more, but you needed more time. I couldn't allow things to go too far before you had the necessary time."
"Time for what?" Shida snapped back at him, with an aggressive but ultimately useless step in the glass's direction. "Time to grow even weaker? To have my body shrivel up even more? Is that it? When I got so weak that the other officers would have started to win the fights that they started, is that when you would have finally allowed me to advance? When I wasn't threatening anymore?" She had come so close to the glass that her breath was fogging up its surface. However, she recoiled slightly, as Uton suddenly reared up and brought his large hands flatly against the barrier, pressing them against it so hard that his palms began to turn pale.
"I never knew it had gotten so bad,"
he burst out, with what sounded like desperate anger.
"I never knew. It happened over such a long time. You didn't even notice yourself."
He breathed deeply, trying to get his voice under control, but his hands remained pressed to the glass.
"I wanted you to live like everyone else. I didn't want you to have to stand out. You You were always so strong. It never seemed like... How could I ever know that you were growing weaker? He asked, his eyes wide in desperation, and what seemed to be earnest grief.
Shida swallowed, but the embers burning deep inside her caused her to step all the way up to the glass again. Maybe I would have noticed if you had ever allowed me to test my strength, she rebuffed his claims. It was true. Even she had never truly noticed just how weak she had grown during her time under Uton's command. But unlike him, she didn't feel like it had to be that way.
And for what? Uton asked, and finally pulled his hands down the glass to leave them hanging at his sides. Your strength was forged to survive on a Deathworld. On a modern spaceship, it is entirely unnecessary.
Who cares about necessity? Shida asked with a snapping, arching gesture of her hand. This is about living. No, I don't need to test my strength, but why shouldn't I? What damage is there to it? What damage does me seeing how much I can lift cause? Or me wearing clothes? Or James replacing his arm? Or Curie replacing way more? She deflated, as her anger was slowly losing an internal battle with grief and exhaustion. She had come here with every intention of just being angry at the man, but the longer she was looking at the captain's sad, desperate, and yet still happy face, the more she felt like everything inside her wasn't angry, but just sad. Sad about how everything had happened. Sad that it couldn't have been some different way. Limply, she pressed her own hand against the glass, as she couldn't keep up her eye contact for a second, and was forced to look down at her own feet. Was I also only an order away from being an unsolved explosion in one of the ship's rooms? She asked under her breath, her voice disobeying her, as she tried to command it to be firm. Shida could hear the soft sound of Uton's hands also pressing against the glass again, as the man seemingly scrambled to push himself as closely to it as he could.
No!
He immediately let out, in a fight for air that let it come out as a wild exclamation, before he took a proper breath to reiterate more slowly.
No, of course not. I could never have.
Why not? Shida interrupted him, her hand that was pressed to the glass curling slowly. What makes me different from the others? Uton seemed taken aback.
Shida, I've taken care of you since...
he began to state, but Shida yet again interjected. And? She asked, her hand clenching even tighter as she managed to lift her gaze yet again. What does it matter? I'm just like everyone else. Why wouldn't I just be another failed project? Finally, she made eye contact with the man again, her gaze now sharper than it had ever been before. If you had actually cared, she said, with a quiet but firm tone, the words just coming out of her without active thought, as she spoke the realization of reality as it came to her. You would have cared about everything about me, not just the parts that were convenient. If you had actually cared about me, you would have realized that what you were doing was wrong along the way. You would have realized that what you were doing was hurting the very person you claimed to have cared about, but you didn't. You only ever saw what you wanted, and you didn't care how it affected me or others. She exhaled once again, her ears snapping forwards to indicate that the captain had her full attention at that moment. Tell me why, she ordered firmly. Tell me what has made you this way. Tell me why I had to endure all of this for all those years. I want to hear it from your mouth. Uton exhaled and pulled away from the glass, falling back into his sitting position with a heavy huff.
I never thought this would be how we will have this conversation,
he admitted, while one of his large hands reached for his head, grabbing a handful of his short fur.
But it was always my intention to eventually tell you. Even now, you still deserve to know.
He looked down at Shida. His dark eyes were tired, but there was a sense of stone-solid determination locked away behind them.
I've seen it my entire life. Ever since I was a cadet at just as young of an age as you were, all the way to my later years as a decorated man, he explained, while his eyes remained solidly focused onto hers. The things that happen when we aren't united as a galaxy. When I was just a uniform year old, it was the first time that I met with someone who was different. Not just different in body, I mean, but different in mind. They were Deathworlders of the Tansnay Giraffa, Class 2, poisonous atmosphere and abundance of ionizing radiation.
As far as I know, the one causes the other on their homeworld, and those circumstances are easily replicated with a certain machine that produces the same radiation that is so prominent on their home. They set loose one of those machines on the station I was visiting back then. For them, it was like taking a breath of fresh air. For everyone around them, it was like their lungs were rusting inside of their bodies.